The candles in the Ashford dining room had been lit an hour before sunset. Lady Hortense Voss believed in atmosphere the way other women believed in prayer. Absolutely, and with considerable personal investment. She had counted the tapers herself that afternoon, repositioned the centerpiece twice, and instructed the kitchen to serve the lamb slightly underdone, because she had once overheard that the Duke of Hargrove preferred his meat that way. Whether this was true or simply rumor absorbed into fact through repetition, she could not say. What she could say was that nothing about this evening would be left to chance. "Stand straighter," she said, without looking up from the arrangement of crystal she was inspecting. Cecilia Voss, stationed near the window in a gown the color of winter roses, adjusted her posture with the ease of long practice. She was 22 years old and had been prepared for this kind of evening the way a blade is prepared, ground down, sharpened, made useful for a single purpose. She was, by every measure society offered, extraordinary to look at. Golden hair dressed in soft coils at her neck, eyes the particular shade of gray that painters attempted and rarely captured. A mouth that knew, instinctively, when to smile and when to remain still. She was also, though no one in her family would have said so plainly, exhausted. "Will he come?" she asked. "He will come," Lady Hortense said. "Men like Edmund Hargrove always come when the invitation is correctly worded." Cecilia turned back to the window and said nothing further. Outside, the grounds of Ashford Estate stretched toward the tree line in the amber light, beautiful still, though the west garden wall needed repointing and the fountain had not run in 2 seasons. The estate was like an aging portrait, impressive at distance, troubling up close. Her mother understood this. It was, in fact, the entire reason for the evening. In the East Wing, Marian Voss was not thinking about the Duke. She was thinking about Theophrastus. Specifically, she was thinking about a passage in his Historia Plantarum that she had been attempting to cross-reference with a newer botanical survey she'd borrowed from the lending library in town, and the two texts disagreed in a way that was either the result of genuine scientific revision or a translator's carelessness. She suspected the latter. She had spread both volumes across the library's reading table along with 3 loose pages of her own notes, and a sketch she'd been refining for the better part of a week. A detailed rendering of the estate's wild hedge rose, which she'd observed through September and into the first cold week of October. Her spectacles had slid to the end of her nose. She did not correct them. Marian was 19 and plain, and she had long ago arrived at a kind of peace with both facts. Plain was not the word her mother used. Her mother used particular, which was worse. The way a word wrapped in silk is still a word. She walked with a slight, permanent hitch in her left leg from a fall at 13, the result of a riding lesson she had not wanted to take on a horse she had correctly assessed as poorly tempered. The limp was minor. It was, in rooms like the one her mother was currently presiding over, enormous. She had been told clearly that morning, "Stay in the East Wing tonight. Do not come to dinner. Do not wander." She had agreed without argument, which was easy because she had no desire to attend. The East Wing library was, in her private estimation, the finest room in the house, floor to ceiling in dark shelving, a reading chair positioned near the fire, a single tall window that faced the garden. It smelled of old paper and beeswax. She had claimed it years ago by virtue of being the only person in the family who used it. She read aloud sometimes, when she was alone. Not from vanity or theater, but because certain sentences deserved to be spoken, demanded it, even. She was doing this now, working through the Latin in a low, unhurried voice, pausing occasionally to make a notation in the margin of her own pages. She did not hear the door open. The Duke of Hargrove had excused himself from the dining table on the pretext of requiring air, which was not untrue. Lady Hortense Voss was a woman of considerable determination and very little subtlety, and dinner had consisted of 3 courses and a sustained campaign that would have impressed a military general. Cecilia had been positioned, performed, and presented. She was lovely. She was accomplished. She was, he had recognized within the first quarter hour, deeply unhappy in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the woman seated at the head of the table. He had no interest in entering a family dynamic of this particular architecture. He had followed the corridor away from the dining room without clear direction, drawn by the faint sound of a voice, not calling out, not performing, simply speaking, and had arrived at the library door to find it slightly ajar. He pushed it open 2 inches and stopped. A young woman sat at the reading table with her back half turned to the door, dark hair loosely pinned, spectacles down her nose, one ink-stained hand holding a page flat while the other moved a pencil in small, precise strokes. She was reading aloud in Latin, clean pronunciation, thoughtful cadence, and then she stopped, frowned at the page, and said to no one, "That's wrong, that is absolutely wrong." She reached for a second book, compared the passages, made a sharp note with her pencil, and muttered something further that he could not hear. Edmund Hargrove stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he knocked. She looked up without alarm, only mild irritation, as though he were an interruption in a sequence she'd been managing perfectly well alone. "The library is occupied," she said. "I can see that," he replied. "I was hoping you might not mind the company." She studied him with the frank, unhurried assessment of someone who had not been taught to make men comfortable with their first impression. "That depends," Marin Voss said, "on whether you know any Latin." He did not return to the dining table for 40 minutes. When he did, Lady Hortense watched him settle back into his chair with the particular stillness of a woman recalculating. Dessert was served. Conversation resumed. Cecilia smiled at the correct moments and said the correct things, and the Duke was polite and attentive and entirely, unmistakably elsewhere. At the evening's close, on the steps of Ashford, Lady Hortense made her move. She had not built this evening on careful foundations, only to let it dissolve into pleasantries. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of a woman who had rehearsed warmth, "I hope the evening has demonstrated what I have long believed, that Cecilia would make a remarkable Duchess. She is everything a man of your position could require." The Duke drew on his gloves. He looked at Lady Hortense with an expression that was courteous and entirely closed. "She is remarkable," he said. "You have my compliments on a fine evening, Lady Voss." He descended one step, paused. "The girl in the library," he said. "Who is she?" The silence that followed was brief and absolute. "That," Lady Hortense said carefully, "is my younger daughter, Marin." "I see." He nodded once as though something had been confirmed rather than discovered. "Good evening." He walked to his carriage without looking back. Inside the house, Cecilia stood at the top of the stairs where she had heard every word. In the library, Marin had already returned to Theophrastus, entirely unaware that anything had changed, not knowing that a door had opened that evening on her life, and that it had nothing to do with the library, and everything to do with the fact that she had been, entirely by accident, exactly herself. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Marin knew it was for her only because Thomas, the house boy, brought it directly to the library rather than to the silver tray in the entrance hall where correspondence was sorted, and occasionally, quietly reviewed by Lady Hortense before reaching its intended recipient. Thomas was 12 and loyal to Marin in the uncomplicated way of someone who had once found an injured sparrow in the garden and watched her spend 3 weeks nursing it back to flight. He set the letter on the edge of her reading table without a word and left before she could ask questions. The seal was unfamiliar. She opened it without ceremony. It was not a declaration. It was not flattery. It was a response, precise and unhurried, to the argument she had made in the library about the mistranslation in the Theophrastus text. The Duke had gone home, apparently, and consulted his own copy. He had found 2 additional errors she had not mentioned. He wrote about them with the straightforward enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting years for a conversation of this specific variety, and was not inclined to waste it on pleasantries. At the bottom, in the same even hand, "I hope you will not consider it an imposition if I write again." Marin read the letter twice. set it down, picked it up, read it a third time. Then she went to find her own copy of Theophrastus because he was right about the second error and she needed to verify the third. Lady Hortense received the Duke's formal request to call upon the family 3 days later. She sat with it at her writing desk for a long time, the paper held at a slight distance as though it carried a faint, unpleasant smell. Then she summoned Marin. "You will be pleasant," she said, when Marin stood before her. "You will be quiet. You will allow Cecilia to guide the conversation, and you will not, under any circumstances, argue with him about books." "He enjoys arguing about books," Marin said. "That is not the point." "What is the point?" Lady Hortense set the letter down with great precision. "The point, Marin, is that the Duke of Hargrove is a powerful man who has clearly made some form of error in judgment that we are not in a financial position to correct. We will receive him graciously. We will allow him to see that Cecilia is the obvious and natural choice. And when he comes to his senses, we will all behave as though this interlude never occurred." Marin looked at her mother for a long moment. "And if he doesn't come to his senses?" Lady Hortense had no answer for that, which was, Marin recognized, an answer in itself. He came on a Thursday and then the following Monday and then twice the week after that. He brought her a volume on medieval herbalism that she had mentioned in passing in her second letter. He did not bring flowers. He did not compliment her appearance. He asked her, on his third visit, what she thought about the enclosure of common lands, and whether the botanical surveys she studied were affected by the loss of traditional hedgerows. She told him, at length, with references. He listened with the full, unperforming attention of someone who intended to remember what she said. It was the most disorienting experience of her adult life. She found herself walking more carefully than usual when he was present, not from self-consciousness, but from a new, uncomfortable awareness of being watched by someone who appeared to be watching her rather than the accumulated evidence of her deficiencies. She caught herself twice, removing her spectacles before she entered a room he occupied, and both times she put them back on before reaching the door, furious at the reflex. She was not going to become a performance. She had watched Cecilia perform her entire life and understood the cost. Cecilia, for her part, was not gracious in defeat. She was subtle, which was more dangerous. A comment at breakfast about the awkwardness of Marin's gait. A soft observation, made in the Duke's peripheral presence, about how difficult it must be to have a sister who struggled so in social situations. A smile offered to the Duke that carried within it the full weight of everything she represented, conventional, beautiful, certain. The Duke's expression did not change during these moments. That was what Cecilia could not forgive. Not anger, not discomfort. Simply a mild and unassailable indifference, as though she were demonstrating a skill he had already assessed and found irrelevant to his purposes. On the fourth week of his visits, Cecilia arranged it differently. She waited until Marin was occupied with the household accounts, a task Lady Hortense had assigned deliberately, hoping it would keep her from the library, and received the Duke alone in the drawing room. She had dressed carefully. She sat in the best light. She was, by every external measure, flawless. She told him plainly that she admired him, that she believed they were well suited. That whatever curiosity had drawn him toward her sister was the natural response of a well-traveled man to something unusual, but that unusual wore thin, and she would not. The Duke was quiet for a moment after she finished. "Miss Voss," he said, "you are lovely. I mean that without reservation." He paused. "But I have spent the better part of my life in rooms full of loveliness, and I have been lonelier in those rooms than I care to describe." Cecilia said nothing. "What your sister offers me," he continued, "is not unusual, it is honest. I had forgotten those were different things." He left shortly after. Cecilia remained in the drawing room for a long time in the best light, entirely alone. It was Marin herself who finally confronted him. She had been composing the argument for 3 days, turning it in her mind with the same methodical attention she gave a difficult translation. On a gray Wednesday afternoon, when the Duke arrived and they had settled in the library with tea neither of them was drinking. She set down her pencil and looked at him directly. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer without the particular kindness you use when you think I require protecting." He set his cup down. "All right." "Are you choosing me?" she said. "Because I am a correction. Because you have decided, somewhere in your reasoning, that choosing plainness over beauty is a principled act, and I am the instrument of that principle." The question landed in the room and stayed there. He did not answer immediately, and she respected him for it. A fast denial would have told her everything. Instead, he looked at the fire for a long moment and then back at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something stripped of its composure. "I have considered that," he said quietly. "I want to be honest, when I first saw you in this room there was something of relief in it. I won't pretend otherwise." He paused, but relief fades. What has not faded, Marin, in 6 weeks of letters and conversation, and every hour I have spent in this room, is that you are the only person who has ever made me feel that I am speaking with someone rather than at them. He leaned forward slightly. "You forgot to perform. I don't think you even knew that was remarkable." "I knew immediately." The fire shifted. Somewhere outside, the wind moved through the dry garden. Marin looked at him for a long time, measuring as she always measured, with the precision of someone who had learned early that the world was generous with its fictions. She did not tell him she believed him, but she did not tell him she didn't. And in the small, careful economy of Marin Voss, that was very nearly everything. The dressmaker came on a Monday with 3 assistants and an opinion about everything. Lady Hortense had arranged it without consulting Marin, which was not a surprise, and had selected 4 gowns in colors Marin would not have chosen, which was also not a surprise. What surprised her was how long she stood still for it. She let them pin and adjust and discuss the architecture of her hair as though she were a building being renovated. She answered questions in monosyllables. She did not argue. She told herself it was practical. An engagement announcement required presentation. She understood presentation the way she understood most things she did not particularly enjoy, as a function with a purpose, to be executed and concluded. By the 3rd fitting, she had stopped looking at the mirror entirely. It was during the 4th, on a gray Friday afternoon, that Edmund arrived unannounced. He had sent a note that morning which had, in the careful management of Ashford's incoming correspondence, not reached her. Thomas led him to the east wing out of habit, and he appeared in the dressing-room doorway to find Marin standing on a low platform in a pale blue gown she had not selected, her spectacles removed, her hair arranged in a configuration that required 3 pins and someone else's idea of beauty, staring at the wall beside the mirror with the fixed expression of a woman enduring something. The dressmaker turned. The assistant stilled. Edmund looked at Marin. She did not look at him. She was aware of him the way you are aware of cold air entering a room immediately, completely, without needing to locate the source. "Could you give us a moment?" he said to the dressmaker. It was not quite a question. When the room had emptied, he crossed to the small side table where her spectacles sat folded beside a pincushion and a length of ivory ribbon. He picked them up, walked to the platform, held them out. She took them without speaking and put them on. Something moved through her chest, small and unlocking like a bolt drawn back. "You looked like you were disappearing," he said quietly. "I was practicing," she said, "being suitable." "I didn't ask you to be suitable." "No." She stepped down from the platform without assistance. "But the announcement dinner is in 10 days, and your entire social world will be in that room, and I am very clearly aware of what they will see when they look at me." "Tell me," he said. She looked at him over the rim of her spectacles with an expression that was tired and precise. "They will see the lesser sister, the odd one. They will look for your reason and they will not find one that satisfies them, and they will construct one that does, and it will not be flattering to either of us." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said, "they will." She had expected reassurance. His agreement startled her into silence. "And it will be unpleasant," he continued, "for a period of time, probably longer than either of us would prefer. He paused. I am asking you with full knowledge of that to come anyway, as yourself, not as what my world expects. As the woman who corrected my Latin and argued with me for 40 minutes about hedgerows and reeds allowed to an empty room, because some sentences deserve to be spoken. Marin looked at him for a long time. Then she reached up and began removing the pins from her hair, one by one, until it fell back to its ordinary arrangement. She set the pins in a small pile on the side table with quiet finality. "All right," she said. Cecilia found her the night before the dinner. Marin was in the library, of course she was, reviewing a letter she intended to send to a botanical society in Edinburgh that had, improbably, expressed interest in her illustrated survey of the estate's hedgerow species. The fire was low. The house was mostly quiet. Cecilia stood in the doorway in her dressing gown, and for a moment she looked younger than Marin had seen her look in years. Stripped of the gown and the arrangement and the practiced positioning, she was simply a tired woman in a doorway. Then the moment passed, and something harder settled back into her expression. "He'll grow tired of the novelty of you," Cecilia said. "Men always want the beautiful one in the end." The words landed with the precision of long practice. Marin set her letter down. She did not feel the cruelty of it the way she once would have, like a verdict. She felt it differently now, like a window into something she had not fully seen before. "I know you believe that," Marin said. Her voice was even. "I think you have been taught to believe it because it is the only version of the world in which you are safe." Cecilia said nothing. "You are beautiful, Cecilia, genuinely." Marin paused. "But you have been told your entire life that it is the most important thing about you, and I am sorry for that. I am truly sorry because you are also clever and you are also capable, and I have watched those things go completely unremarked for 22 years because the room always stopped at your face." Cecilia's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Marin saw it. A flicker of something unguarded. "I hope," Marin said quietly, "that someone loves you someday for something you built, something that is entirely yours and has nothing to do with how you look standing in good light." Cecilia left without answering. Marin returned to her letter. Her hand was steady. The dinner was everything she had predicted. She arrived in a dress she had chosen herself, deep green wool, simply cut, entirely appropriate and entirely her own. Her spectacles were on. Her hand, scrubbed but still faintly ink-shadowed at the left forefinger, held a small evening bag her mother had selected and she had not objected to. A single concession. She felt it was reasonable. The room noticed her the way rooms notice things that do not fit their expectations, a collective, barely audible recalibration. She felt the assessments moving across her like weather. She kept her shoulders level and her pace even and did not look for approval in any of the faces turning toward her. Edmund was across the room when she entered. He saw her immediately. He crossed to her without hesitation, without performance, without the theatrical deliberateness of a man making a point. He simply moved toward her the way people move toward things that belong to them naturally and without looking to see who was watching. He took her hand. Around them, the room continued its recalibration. Somewhere to her left, she heard a whispered exchange she chose not to parse. Somewhere near the window, her mother stood with a fixed smile and the rigid posture of a woman adapting to circumstances she had not authored. Marin did not look at any of it. She looked at Edmund, who was looking at her with the straightforward, unguarded attention she had come to recognize as simply the way he looked at her, as though she were worth the full effort of being seen. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she replied. He smiled, not widely, not for the room. A small, private thing meant only for her. They moved together into the evening, into the noise and the assessment and the long social machinery of a world that would spend considerable energy deciding what to make of them. It would have opinions. It would revise them. It would, eventually, move on to something else because the world always did. But that was later. In this moment, standing in a room full of people who were looking at her, finally, irrevocably looking, Marin Voss did not search for the nearest door. She did not calculate the distance to the library or rehearse a quiet exit or make herself small in the particular way she had spent 19 years perfecting. She stood in the light, and for the first time in her life, she did not want to disappear.